Hi, Pratham here from Calcutta Cricket Cast. I'm joined by my mate Rohan, and today we wanted to share our thoughts regarding the fourth Ashes Test between Australia and England at the Sydney Cricket Ground. And before we get started talking about the proceedings of the match itself, I think it's fairly important to cast an eye on the pitch because keeping in par with the tradition set during the course of the series, we've seen surfaces that have offered more life than was traditionally attributed to wickets in Australia. And this was very much the case for this particular match.
Yeah, I really like the wicket.
Yeah,
Honestly, it's something that I don't normally say about the SCG because historically it's just kind of been bad in recent years.
yeah, it's just been a flat pancake, really, right?
Yeah, that insults the Firoz Shah Kotla by calling itself a flat pancake.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably got more bounce than the Firoz Shah Kotla, but less spin, right? So,
Yeah,
it's not. But yeah, it's been a wicket that has been pretty good to bat on and hasn't deteriorated much, and just not been particularly helpful to the bowlers. But
after all, India drew a match here with a batsman without a back and a batsman without a leg, so it's not like so we're not exaggerating by saying it was pretty tame in the recent past.
yes, but it's changed for this particular Test match, and props on them because the issues with a lack of pace and bounce have sort of been resolved with the surface that we got to see for this particular Test match. Right, there was some coarse green grass that had been left on the wicket, and it sort of helped it to bind together and gave it a pretty good bounce. And really reasonable pace, right? So the fast bowlers were able to bend. If they bent their back, they were easily able to get the ball to sail over the keeper's head, right? So that
even until day 5,
yeah.
Yeah. So that's like really good to see.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And I think it was it did have its problems, right? Like for instance, the grass that was kept on it was tufty in places, which meant that you saw inconsistent bounce on the first day itself, right? Because some of the patches that were green, the ball bounced a little bit more. Some where they were barer, didn't bounce as much. So there was that. You generally don't like seeing that much inconsistent bounce on the first day itself, but it wasn't to the point where it was dangerous, which is a good thing, and it didn't really deteriorate massively over the course of the match. Now, that did have, in saying that, there was another issue, which is interesting to note. Traditionally, the story of the reputation of the SCG has been is that it's a wicket that's assisted spinners, because it turns a bit there. And it didn't really turn that much during the game. It turned a little bit more as the game went on, but it didn't really deteriorate or crumble as you would expect on an SCG pitch on day 5. And so that was a little bit disappointing, but and it was a little bit weird too because the wicket was left drier right under the surface by the curator. He admitted it as much after the match, but on the the plus side of it, it did last the 5 days, right? Yes, rain happened, but it lasted the 5 days, and we got to see the result almost decided at the very last ball of the match. So, props to that. But yeah, all in all, a pretty good pitch, and it really set up a very nice contest. A series where things have been one-sided, it was probably looking like it was going to be the best bet for England to come back and land a knockout punch of their own.
For England to have a chance at potentially winning, or even as they did, drawing the match.
Yeah, and as you said, they finally started to deliver, to some extent, some knockout punches, right? But it didn't start out well for them, to be honest. Anderson and Broad got the new ball, and it feels like it's a broken record at this point, Rowan, you and me, when we talk about it, but they again wasted the new ball when it really mattered in that first session and that first day, because in the case of like Jimmy, he bowled a little bit too wide and too back of a length in his deliveries, right?
Which is sort of a broken record for Jimmy, which he should know that he shouldn't do by this point.
He literally responded to criticism of it, like in just the match before, right? Like he saw that it was more effective. But
I'm also just saying that this is like his fifth tour to Australia, fifth tour, something like that.
Yeah, it's disappointing because he clearly has seen enough indications to know what sort of length to bowl on the surface, but he's just not been able to consistently do it or showed an inkling to do it consistently enough, right? But honestly, probably the even bigger disappointment, and I know it's going to seem odd for our viewers, right? Regarding the match, because Broad ended up taking a 5 for him, right? He ended up actually doing pretty well, but in the end, statistically, but he also wasted that new ball, and his disappointments were probably even worse than Jimmy's, because Broad was assigned in the team to do one job, really, to impose himself on the two left-handers in Harris and even more so in particular Warner, right? And the failure to impose himself on the match situation regarding that was really disappointing, right?
Absolutely.
First up, because the thing is, right, the context behind it being was that the part of the build-up of the series, right, in Australia, came off the back of that previous Ashes series in England, 2019. And Broad basically got Warner out for fun in that series.
He basically just put the ball near enough to stumps that David Warner would just play at every ball and would just nick or drive on or just miss. Yeah,
just take it away just a tad bit consistently, bowl that channel around the wicket, right? He'd come around the wicket to the left-hander in Warner and basically just dismiss him non-stop. And he tried it this time, and he actually got Warner's wicket. But by the time he did that, Warner had sort of pushed on to the 30, and he'd really gotten Australia off to a pretty good start.
They were on solid ground by that point.
And again,
1 for 51 is a good point.
Yeah, so if you're getting a 50-run stand, that's generally a pretty decent partnership start to count with. And again, what's frustrating is, I mean, he ended up getting his wicket in the 20th over, right? So again, already start established. But what's really disappointing with Broad and why it sort of rankles a little bit, right, as a neutral observer, is because the cause of him failing to get Warner's wicket earlier on in the piece was very similar to the cause of him failing to get Warner's wicket earlier on in the piece in Adelaide, on a wicket which also was relatively bouncy.
And this is, I do want to bring this up because we've been saying this, everyone who covers the Ashes has been saying this non-stop since pretty much the first test, is that England aren't pitching it up far enough, they aren't executing the fields in their plans, and and it was very much the same here. And in terms of execution, you brought the point up. The thing that both in Adelaide and here at the SCG, Broad failed to do consistently well enough is to not stray onto the pads. He bowled too many deliveries around middle and leg, and it allowed Warner to clip him easily. And so Warner wasn't really forced to worry about or have any sort of pressure about nicking much behind the slips from that line, because if it's a ball at leg stump, you're not going to edge that most of the time. And if you do edge it, it's probably just one of those balls that you're going to get out to one way or the other.
Yeah, it would take a real Jaffa to edge it and go to first slip, right? So, I mean, it's just not it wasn't a good enough. He didn't get the ball in the right place enough and to the field that was set. And they paid a little bit for it, but what really sort of made them pay a little bit later, once him and Harris departed, was a pretty solid partnership between Khawaja and Smith, right? Because both of those two actually did do really well after a rain-affected day where Australia did lose 3 wickets first up, even though they had scored about 120. They were a bit of a precarious position, and those 2 came out on the second day and really consolidated their position into a match-winning position, really, or at least a position where they couldn't lose. Smith, he scored a really good 60 again. His defensive technique's very good. He ran between the wickets well, I thought.
In a sense, it looked almost like it was vintage Steve Smith, but it just sort of wasn't, because vintage Steve Smith would turn that 50 into 100.
Yeah, and that has been an issue in recent times. He hasn't been able to convert into enough centuries in these last couple of years. But it's sort of like Kohli, right? Like he's too good of a batsman to, get that.
What's the saying? You can't keep a good man down, right?
Yeah. And Smith clearly did do his piece here. But the start of the day was easily Usman Khawaja.
Start of the match, really.
Yeah, well, he was the man of the match, right? But his knock in the first innings, I'd argue, was probably better than the one in the second innings, even though the second innings, we'll get to it. The
second innings was much more fun to watch because he was just like, I'm just going to hit every ball. But in the first innings, it was the classic Usman Khawaja sort of gritty but not overly so kind of performance. Yeah,
and I'd say what was impressive about it, right, was really his temperament, right? That's what's really worth commending, because he, again, as we mentioned, guys, the surface was a bit patchy and bouncy in places, so it would rear up. Even Anderson, on the very first ball of the match, actually got it to rear up against Warner, and that happened probably 10, 12 times during Khawaja's innings, and it hit him in the gloves, or hit him on the body and so forth, from just good length delivery, short of a length delivery as well, right? So we're talking about a surface that's not necessarily the most reliable for a batsman, but he took those raps and he continued on pretty undeterred. He looked very convincing. He didn't lose any sort of composure. And what I loved about it was the next time he saw a delivery that was short of the length that came out, he often punished it with a...
Can we talk about Jack Leach?
Yeah, I was getting to it, right? Because there is an argument that as good as Khawaja and Smith played, they could have probably been better, if not, or they could have probably been stopped in the tracks if Leach was actually given a decent field for once. But I think we've said that constantly.
Yeah, this first innings was basically everything England has done wrong in the series to date, in every minute way.
Yeah, and it was obvious with Leach, right? Because again, Leach's use by Joe Root in that first English innings, right, really beggared belief and was incredibly short-sighted and negative.
It made no sense in line, length, or field position, or position in the match. It almost felt like Joe Root has Jack Leach on the side and doesn't know what to do with the spinner. Yeah,
and specifically,
which makes no sense, by the way, because Joe Root is like a half decent spinner.
Yeah, you'd think that especially because he loves bowling spin. It seems, you would think that he would try to set better fields for Leach, but clearly that's not been the case. And the most obvious example of this was in this match, right? Because you look at when Leach was brought on in that first innings of Australia on the second day, early on, right? Which was, okay. He
good idea, bring him in, get him a few overs.
54th over, right? So 3 overs had passed, right? Pretty decent time. And it made sense also in the sense that, Steve Smith and Usman Khawaja on that start of day 2, right, were new to the crease, right? So it was like, okay, there's some sort of a aggressive thing. But then you saw the field and you're like, oh, okay, this is the intention. Because what he did was, for the left-hander, Usman Khawaja, right, he set 4 men onto the leg side boundary, and instructed Leach to bowl a line on or even outside leg stump with no leg slip, but a slip, which...
And you know what the best part of this is, Pratham?
What?
The day before, on the comment, I think it was on BT Sport or whatever, they had a segment where they were talking about how do you set fields? How do you bowl spin as a youngster, and how do you set fields for spin as a youngster?
Yeah, and I remember Warney was on that, wasn't he?
Yeah. And they were both like, okay, what you do is you get a couple of players in, because the job of a spinner is to do what, Pratham?
Take wickets.
What is the second job of the spinner?
To control the flow of the game.
Okay, how do you do that?
You set fields that actually allow them to do that.
Which is to set somewhat of an attacking field initially and building pressure, right?
Yes.
And you don't put players deep on the boundary because you're scared of giving up runs.
And no, you don't. And you especially don't tell your main frontline spinner to be like, hey, let me bowl deliveries where it is physically impossible with the field that I've set for you to get a wicket. We talked about Khawaja already, how that's ridiculous, because if a left-arm orthodox spinner like Leach, right, is turning it into Khawaja, right, and he's bowling on leg stump, it is literally impossible for him to get the left-hander with the field that we set that we talked about.
You're not going to get a wicket.
You're not going to get an LBW. You're not going to get a bowl. You're not going to get him edge to slip, right? And it basically allowed Khawaja to easily release pressure by just, taking a single, right, rotating the strike and hitting it to any one of those fielders in the deep without really even trying. But you look at Smith's field, right? Now, in the India series, Ashwin and Jadeja, right, they bowled to fields which were, containing, were attacking in a sense, right? They had those fielders.
They bowled on the stumps, but it wasn't. I don't know how best to put it. It wasn't a defensive attempt to bowl to the stumps. It was okay. Let's push him back on the back foot, and then also at the same time take away the back foot shot.
Yeah, the defense and feel less confident attacking spin, not being allowed to clip and so forth. It was very constrictive bowling, right? But you look at this field here that was set for Leach in this situation, right? That Leach was given to tackle Smith, right? He was the architect, one of the architects of that Indian bowling strategy by the spinners. He's given to Smith, right? Leach is given a spread out field on the offside. You have
which is always a bad idea to Steve Smith.
Yeah, but especially a bad idea, right? When you have a deep long off, right? And you're instructing your spinner to bowl a middle stump to middle to off line, right? Because what essentially all that Smith had to do, right, was he just had to push the ball in the vacant gap where mid-off was lying, right? And he was easily able to take singles. If there's an easy single available from the line that you're bowling, by keeping a fielder out in the deep in either mid-off or mid-on, right, then it's probably not a very good field. And we saw that. And the reason why it's important, again, guys, is because from a position of 143, which Australia were in, where, they're slightly on top, but not extensively so.
No, it was 3 for 117, and then, that's not an impossible position to seize back momentum from that.
Yeah, and by the time Leach came in, it was I think it was like 3 for 140. Yeah. But the point being, right, you're still technically in the game. A couple of wickets and suddenly Australia are in trouble. You can dismiss them under 300. You might have a shot here. But this really released the pressure that the Pacers were like putting on them, like Wood and so forth. They actually did bowl well. And so you essentially got into a situation where really let Australia off the hook, and they were able to capitalize because they have good batsmen. The other thing I will say, it did come, as we said, it was a little too late, but Broad did improve on that second day. He got the ball to pitch it up.
Yeah,
more.
Especially after the second new ball, I think when he was able to pitch the ball up, he trusted that he wouldn't get hit for too many runs. Still got hit, but not that badly. Yeah,
and he finished up with a 5-wicket haul, which I think his stats in that context were fair. He, messed up the first time, then he came back in, and he was the main wicket-taking threat, apart from Wood going onwards, right? But Australia, pretty comfortably in the end, finishing their innings of note, right, with a pretty good score, declaring at 416 odd, because at the time of the rain, they wanted to be in a position where they could bowl out England twice, so they did declare a little bit earlier in the piece, only 134 overs, but it made sense in the context of that. But then you come to England's innings, and initially it seems same old, right? Because let's just say it's not exactly the greatest of start for them. Hamid again basically goes for very cheap. He's kind of made that happen in this series. He's
Unfortunately, because I think on this channel we've made it very clear that we rate Usman Khawaja as a Test match player.
Yeah, we certainly do. He couldn't pick the scramble team or variation effectively, right? For the start. Crawley also got bowled, looked pretty decent, and then got bowled through the gate while driving. But really, his dismissal, along with, after Milan got out the green, there was a sort of really fascinating period where England lost 3 for 0 in 53 balls, where literally it was like 8.5 maidens of pressure that was put before lunch on that day 3, and I think a lot of that had to do with Scott Bowles.
How is this man alive? Not alive. How is this man allowed to exist in cricket?
It's an incredible
on a philosophical level, Pratham. I'm just talking about philosophical levels. Not is he a legitimate player or whatever. I'm just saying this guy comes out of pretty much nowhere.
Yeah.
Right? And then all of a sudden turns into something of like I don't even know the right word for it. It's mind-boggling how good this guy is. Because remember, we were talking about this. Like Akshar Patel comes out of nowhere, right?
Yeah. Has an average of 9.
Everyone's like, "Oh God, this guy's he's incredible. He has an average of he has an average of 9, and it's incredible. And he's just destroying lineups at home in India. Now India is even more unbeatable at home. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this Victorian stalwart shows up out of nowhere to play basically as an injury replacement.
Yeah, an injury replacement.
Backup to an injury replacement.
Exactly. And then he takes 6 for 7.
He has an economy of 8 after 2 Test matches.
He has an average of 8. Yeah.
An average of 8, not an economy of 8. That would be a very different discussion.
That would be a very different discussion indeed. But no, he's been incredible. It's actually interesting because the MCG specialist tag was given, right? Like the expectation was that if he was going to play, he was going to play the MCG because he's suited to the ground, the conditions, and so forth. And that was going to be basically it. He was going to get 1 test, and then the big guns in Hazelwood would come back, and Wright Richardson maybe even was up the pecking order than him. But man, oh man, has he had an insane start to his career.
I understand it's not sustainable. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be allowed to continue. But it's just amazing to watch because I think the figures themselves, like this is very often on this channel, we've talked about how important context is.
Yeah.
Right? And that figures don't always show that kind of
the real story
and scope of how important an innings was or how good the ball was or how good the spell was. But in this case, I think they just do because he bowled 14.1 overs with 6 maidens going for 36 runs and took 4 wickets.
Yeah, pretty damn good stats, man.
Probably could have taken a couple more as well. It's not as if it was like, oh, well, yeah, that's good. But no, he probably could have taken 3 or 4 more wickets.
Yeah, he was honestly, he was, Cummins and Lyons were having an off day, and as such, he was probably the best bowler in that first inning.
He dragged them back into that match. Well, not back into it as much as into that match as a bowling unit.
Performance here at the SCG really indicates there's a little bit more to him than just being that MCG specialist, right? Because there were definitely fans and analysts that sort of derided his 6 for 7 performance as just being an anomaly against a
it's like, oh well, I mean that never happens. He just does it again.
And to be fair, it like he's not going to replicate that insane level of a performance again of 6 for 7.
No, I mean you're just not.
but there were people who thought he was a medium pace sort of trundler who just fed off the pressure of the big guns of the attack, right? The Cummins, the Starks, the guys who bowled 140 clicks and so forth, right? And that he was, really, it was a reflection of how poor England's batting was, that they just collapsed and it could have happened to anyone else, right? But the thing I feel personally, right, is that Boland is a much more threatening bowler than he's being given credit for, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it is true that the English batting lineup is weak and probably have exaggerated his capabilities as a pacer, but the thing is, he just bowls around that fourth or fifth stump line at a pretty reasonable pace. He bowls around 135 clicks, which is not really,
no, he's not slow by any means.
No, he's not slow. He's medium fast, fast medium, right? Not particularly slow.
Like prime Jimmy Anderson speed. That's
no, he's pretty decent in that respect. He bowls with a really upright seam, right, which allows him to, and in his case, he predominantly nips the ball back in, and the variation is of seaming it away, right? But I think, Ron, what was so impressive to me, right, and what is probably his biggest asset as a bowler, and what's made him such a handful in this series, has actually had to do with his action. Because I slowed it down to take a look, right? But I was like, okay, what's going on here? Why is this guy getting 6 for 7? Why is he getting 4 for 36? And so when I did that, I actually found a couple of things that explain why he's such a persistently threatening seamer on wickets that offer him even a little bit, right? And it has to do with his approach to the crease in part, because he has a very loose-limbed approach. His arm is relaxed, slightly bent, and his steps towards the point of the release are fairly unhurried. But then when he picks up when he's near the actual point of delivery, he picks up momentum really well. His hips pivot significantly when delivering the ball. His wrist sort of snaps from that slightly bent nature at the last minute. And that, combined with him gripping the ball fairly lightly throughout, it allows him to generate a lot of backspin on the ball, which is why he's able to generate that extra bit of bounce on deliveries in a way that a lot of commentators, you and me, have probably heard this cliche a lot of the time, but they say
heavy ball,
that's what they're talking about. And in the case of Boland, those three factors really allow him to do that. And we saw it.
I also want to add this, because when you have backspin, that ball sticks a little bit more. So it is harder to read the bounce.
Exactly. And on a pitch which has variable bounce like this one, your threat becomes...
It's not fun to face that on any wicket.
Yeah. So yeah, kudos to him. And they really, England was staring down a massive barrel after that 3 for 0 spell, which he contributed 2 wickets to, when they were 4 for 36, right? But then they were rescued really by a century partnership between Ben Stokes and Johnny Bairstow, and it was a remarkable performance from Johnny Bairstow, because he's been berated by many, and I'll raise my hand, and you can raise yours as well, because we've been part of that crew that has sort of said, this guy is finished, he doesn't deserve a place in the England side, and to some extent I still sort of feel that, but this, in his international career, has definitely sprung back to life.
Yeah, and I also think that this is an innings of emotional significance as much as it was for match significance. Obviously, this is the anniversary of his father's death. If you don't know about that, please educate yourself on it. This is why Johnny Bairstow is... We will criticize Johnny Bairstow the player, but we'll never criticize Johnny Bairstow the person, unless he does something really, really bad on this channel.
Because it's very tragic.
Bairstow obviously got abused by fans at the members end, going back in. And you could see Ben Stokes was ready to drop his gloves and go after these guys, but
but no, I mean there's a lot of emotional turmoil in which this innings was played, and the pressure from the media regarding his deserving a spot on the side, his father's anniversary, the
anniversary of his father's death,
his father's tragic death, and then obviously the abuse from members in certain stands at the ground. It all sort of concocted into sort of a almost challenge or a taunt to Johnny Bairstow to sort of prove his point and medal at the international level, and prove that, and give him a point to prove, right? And that's where Johnny Bairstow is the best as a player. More often than a lot of other players in the lineup, he has raised his hand
up and said, "I'll give it the old college try," as they say.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, sit here and say that it was what I'd call a great innings, right? Because there were mitigating circumstances. Cummins lost the plot in terms of having a consistent line and length for the first time in the series.
Yeah, Cummins probably bowled the worst I've seen him bowl all tour.
Which, I mean, insane that it's taken him now in the fourth test after being captain, all that to produce finally a spell that wasn't good. But no, he was a bit. Well, he lost the plot a little bit when Bairstow was batting. So did Lyon. So it wasn't. And then Boland went off the field as well due to injury. So it's not. It was a little bit later in the match. But the point being, right? Like there was still, there's definitely an extent where there are mitigating circumstances that don't make it a great innings, right? But there's that emotional angst to try to prove. And I will also mention this before I talk about the other thing that really impressed me now from a cricketing perspective, more so from the familial perspective side of things. David Bairstow, who was Johnny's father, was a very scrappy, sort of fighting wicketkeeper bat, and he reserved his best when the team was in trouble. He wasn't necessarily the most gifted at the international level, but he was again somebody who had a lot of courage and heart. And so I think, in a way, Johnny probably wants to honor his dad's sort of indefatigable, spirit. Spirit. Thanks, Ron. In that sense, so I think in that respect, it was really good to see. But then the other thing that was really good to see now, from a cricketing perspective, was how he took on Nathan Lyon, right? Because this entire Ashes series, the English batsmen have basically cowered in the face of Nathan Lyon, or been unsure in their approach, right? You've had guys like Pope who've just got really antsy at the crease and just look completely flummoxed. Or you've got guys like Butler who've just tried to defend them purely on the back foot and just try to fend off and survive, right? And neither approach is going to be successful or sustainable in the long run. What you do need to do is
he is the second best spinner in the world. He knows what you're going to do to him.
Yeah, and he can bowl on a consistent line and length, usually well enough to, get your wicket in the end, right? And he gets that overspin, so he will confound you with a bounce sometimes. So the only way that you're going to really, make sure that he doesn't, get you, right, is that you have to put the pressure back on him a little bit, right? And that's what Johnny did. Now, I don't think that his approach was ideal. He was a little bit too reliant on the sweep shot. And Lyon did bowl with a little bit less zip in that first innings. But what I liked about him is he was like, you know what, I'm going to play percentage shots. I know when the fielders are not, in near deep mid wicket and so forth. I'm going to slog sweep, right?
Yeah, and I'll chance my arm, and if I get out, I get out. But if I don't, well, they're gonna have to get me out one way or the other.
Yeah, and it was critical too, because Stokes was alongside him, and Stokes did a bit more conventionally, right? Did it a bit more conventionally, attacking Lyon. He went down, charged on the wicket, hit him, extra cover, long on and so forth. But they changed the momentum of the series in a bit when it comes to England versus Australia's bowling lineup, because one of the reasons why Australia's bowling lineup has been so effective, an underrated reason, has been down to the fact that England know that Lyon can hold up an end and he can create pressure on one end, and Australia are comfortable in rotating that pitch because they know that they don't have to worry about it, right? With Lyon being attacked, suddenly it's forcing him to sort of change his line and length to try to adjust for that, right? He's looking a little bit toothless and giving the rest of the pacers more of a workload that they have to bowl through. And suddenly the equation's different, right? Especially from a match like Adelaide, where Lyon was able to hold up that end and basically, allow the seamers to rotate and bowl Australia to a victory, right?
Yeah.
So I thought it was very good from him. I think Stokes, the other thing I liked about Stokes in that partnership was that he really did stop fidgeting against the Pacers. There was a lot of, in the previous matches, there was a lot of times where he was, really going, hopping around.
He was in two minds as to what he was going to do, and ended up in neither mind and out.
Yeah, like the green dismissal from the last match was a really good example. But this time he looked really confident. He smashed them every time they bowled slightly short. Just looked really good. And then the best part of the match, I've got
Blade of Justice.
Mark Wood, man, take a bow. Mark Wood, the blade of justice, absolutely spanking Cummins, who was probably the best bowler in the world at this point. Best bowler.
It's just between him and it's between him, KG, and
Bumrah. Yeah, but like incredible to watch. It was just. I'll just sum it up with this.
Mark Wood doing this to him and Washington Sundar doing this to him, he must be feeling rather irritated at like number eights just coming in and just hitting him.
Yeah, but it was fun to watch, man. It was fun, and that's all I'll say. It was too much fun, and it capped a day of finally some sort of promise for England, right?
Yeah.
In a entire swath of disappointments. They were bowled out, right? In the end, were 100
They almost got to 300 problem, and that is worth celebrating because
they haven't.
No, it's not because England need to get to 300 to actually, win a Test match.
They do, but I think at this point England fans will settle for being close to 300 as opposed to 67 all up, which was their previous. So, or 68 all up. But point being, right? They showed some fight, but they were still behind the game. And it was up to Australia to really, sort of drive home the advantage that they had into a winning.
I think we were talking about maybe Australia needs to get 200, 250 runs on the board.
Oh, yeah. In addition to that 130 odd lead, that gives them 375. England haven't gotten 300 in the series period, so it's very unlikely they're going to get it in the fourth innings of this match. So yeah, I think that was a fair target, and a huge reason why Australia looked on track to being able to set that target and ended up going beyond it. In fact, was Usman Khawaja, who followed his first 100 with a much quicker one in the second. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this was a little bit more of a more fluent and more beautiful innings to watch, stroke play wise.
He just decided that he was going to go and. I mean, he only got a century. At this point, you're just playing for the fun. At that point, you've already done your job.
Yeah, he did take a special liking to donking Root and Leach to some extent, right? That was kind of
particularly nice. David Malan.
David Malan also
destroyed David Malan.
Yeah, David Malan ran up to bowl his like little ambly leggies and just got spanked. It was hilarious to watch. I'm not gonna lie. But no, I will say, now that you brought up the three spinners, right? That's the thing that's actually impressed me the most about Khawaja in his return to the side, because that's
been his weakness.
Yes, easily.
Specifically spin. It's not. He doesn't struggle too much with the swinging ball. I mean, he averages like 90 as an opener. So.
Yeah, I mean, he does struggle against lateral movement of most kinds, but he's more comfortable against pacers doing it than spinners, right? Spinners, he really
that's what I'm talking about. Swing is more like he doesn't struggle as much. But against like Ashwin, like in like 2019, I think 2018, the previous Butler Gavaskar Trophy, he basically just threw a nothing ball out there. Tossed a nothing ball out there, and Khawaja immediately scooped him up for an easy catch at cover.
Yeah.
A short cover. It's like.
Yeah, I mean, several spinners have had caused him problems. Like Graham Swan, initially in his career, did it when he went to England in 2013, and they produced some toning pitches for Swan to bowl them out on. When he went to the subcontinent, Herath troubled him. Pereira. He's not had a good record. With one UAE innings where the pitch didn't deteriorate as much, withstanding.
Yeah, but again, that was a class innings.
Yeah.
But then he immediately, the next series, chips one right off of Ashwin doing nothing.
Yeah. So, long story short, he has struggled against the ball that's spun. But what I like about him since he's returned to the side, and at least from evidence that we've seen in this innings, he's opened his stance up to the spinners. And that's actually allowed him to get into better positions, both attacking and defending them. And especially when the ball is turning away from him, like Root and so forth. And the other thing that's really helped him out against spinners, right, and allowed him to be much more aggressive, has been the balance that he's had when playing the reverse sweep. Now, he did this in the UAE innings that we were referring to earlier, but it's improved even further to the point where his head appears absolutely still when he's playing that shot. Sometimes it would veer a little bit. He wouldn't be quite in terms of balance be aligned.
I also think that one other thing that he's done really well is that he doesn't play the reverse sweep or the conventional sweep nearly as much as he used to.
Yeah.
He doesn't. Because he had a really good reverse sweep and sweep, but he was almost over reliant on it, and it felt like he didn't trust his footwork enough to deal with the spinner. But now, yes, he scored a lot off this reverse sweep, but you could see it that he wasn't going to allow Leach in particular, who was mighty in the second innings, to control the match as much.
Yeah.
By forcing him to play those high risk, high reward shots.
Exactly, and he did that in part by also rotating the strike slightly bit more. He's not great at that still against spinners, but he's showed some improvements in that front. So all in all, it's nice to see him go back to domestic, correct some of his domestic cricket, correct some of his flaws, and look a better player in those respects at least, right? And it was an important innings, right? Because the innings at large, the second 100 he got it in really quick time. Got it with like 70 strike rate, if I recall, and 73, right? Something really quick like that. But he was basically able to keep the runs ticking, and they were able to rapidly score those runs so that the declaration could occur with enough time in the bank to bowl England out. That Cummins could get that sort of extra time to do that. It was thanks to Khawaja scoring at that break. I will say, Khawaja was troubled a little bit, and some of the other England batsmen were also, the Australian batsmen were troubled a little bit by Wood. Sort of breathed fire again.
He was fast.
In that third innings. Yeah.
Until he injured his knee.
Yeah, and then after that, he sort of lost the plot, bowled a little bit slower, bowled some half-trackers, got dispatched by Khawaja.
You can understand that when his entire knee area was just covered in blood, and you're just like, okay, fair enough. Nope, that's perfectly understandable.
Yeah, but before
you don't want to put weight on that.
But before that, right, I thought Wood bowled a really threatening and canny spell in that second innings to sort of...
He got David Warner with a 90-mile-per-hour bullet.
Yeah, a 91-mile-per-hour bullet. I still remember it. But it's good you brought that up, because I love... A lot of people think that Wood, just because of the pace, right, he gets wickets, right? And that, he doesn't really swing or move the ball that much, so it's really just the pace and, him being that skiddy guy who can still get a little bit of bounce. That's what's giving him the wickets. He's not a particularly crafty or thinking bowler, right? Which I don't tend to agree with, and I think the Warner dismissal was very good to illustrate that, because in the ball,
yes,
in
it
the
was
over,
very fast, yes, but he set him up perfectly and got his man
in that over, right? Leading up to the dismissal of Warner, he starts from coming around the wicket, 2 deliveries, right? A relatively straight line, same close to the stumps. It's a little bit short, but he's getting it around that. But he gets clipped for some runs. Then he comes over the wicket for the next ball and bowls close to the stumps and a back of a length from wide of the crease, right? And Warner defends it. And then the next ball it's only slight, but he delivers it slightly wider from the crease, right? Almost near the popping crease, and bowls it a little bit wider. So what that has done to Warner is that he's seen 3 straight balls. He now sees ball that's been delivered well wide from the crease. So the assumption is, this ball is going to go well wide away from me, right? And it might be a bit of a loose delivery, so I can, go after it. And the pressure has been sort of set up in that sense. So it's a really good. It suckered him into the shot, right? And so it's true, he might not be that big of a mover of the ball, even off the seam or in the air, but he's making those sort of subtle adjustments, whether intentional or unintentional, that are making him a more threatening bowler than people would give him credit for.
And I think another player that sort of needed a lot, showed why he's a quality player in this tour, despite everyone slating him throughout the entire tour, was Jack Leach.
Yeah. He finally got a good
maintain
field.
Pat Cummins is a coward for not padding up and going out there to just face one. You just have to face one delivery, man.
Yeah, they denied Leach of a hat trick, which he was probably not going to get. But damn it, the symbolism matters.
Yeah. But no, my point is, Jack Leach showed really what he could do if you give him an attacking field.
Yes.
England finally caved to the pressure of the entire cricketing world, it seems, and gave Jack Leach an attacking field.
Yeah, they had somebody near a short cover.
They gave him a bat pad first, like in the first few overs as well.
And then later on, they gave him a short cover, and that helped him out because the line that, again, Leach was trying to bowl, he was bowling around middle and off stump. So what that did really, he actually started bowling a little bit wide in that fourth stump pitch. But the point being, if they wanted to cover drive him, right, from that length, then the short cover sort of made them a little bit more hesitant to it. And that's where Leach is really good, because what Leach is really good at, and he showed this in the subcontinent, is that arm ball that he bowls, which skids onto the pads and so forth. And so he ended up becoming a much more threatening prospect, in part because that fielder was set that sort of created the doubt in the batsman's mind that made them less comfortable to play the shot they would normally associate playing in that situation.
I also want to give one quick shout out here. Josh Butler broke his hand earlier in this match, so was unable to keep. Ollie Pope comes in and did a really good job deputizing. He took he caught four batsmen out behind. So and a couple of those were pretty damn good catches to take.
Yeah, I was
low and skidding and turning kind of deliveries, but credit to him.
Yeah,
for
I was surprised
stepping in a difficult situation for the team and doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised by it, and I thought he looked much better than I anticipated for a temporary wicketkeeper, and did a really
wicketkeeper on short notice as well.
Yeah. But despite all those English sort of performances, you had that innings from Khawaja, and then combined with a rollicking sort of 60, 70 odd from Green. 74, from Green. Australia were able to get the target they wanted to, anticipated or needed to declare the 400 on the board that they anticipated would be enough to drive home the win. And really, they left England a target essentially
388. Yeah. Which is chaseable.
It is, but I mean, for a team that hasn't
scored over 300 in this tour.
Yeah. It wasn't going to be chaseable. No. But I will say, one player seemed to be of a different opinion regarding that, and almost showed that
I made the joke earlier in this match when we were talking about this. Zach Crawley's dad has spent thousands of pounds trying to turn make his son equally shit everywhere in the world.
Yeah, but he
showed that he was like actually good, and it was weird because he was all. But people were commenting on ESPN Crick Info. Shout out to Crick Info. They were commenting it's almost Kevin Peterson-esque. Some of the shots that he was playing, and I was like, yeah, fair. That's a fair description.
Yeah, I mean, you watched him bat in that innings, and
it's like the contempt he had for some of these guys.
No, it was really the most imposing. We were talking about a need to impose yourself on the opposition. That was probably the most imposing innings of the match, even more so than Johnny Bairstow's 100 in the first.
Or Usman Khawaja's hundreds.
Yeah, because of how. There are three factors really that made it so impressive, right? He on-drove with a measure of authority, right, off the paces. He clipped them off the pads every time they over-pitched, right? But it was really the fact that more so than even his front foot stroke, right? It was the absence of strokes on the front foot at times, and conversely, the presence of strokes on the back foot that really showed him, like, for the first time in this series, that he was a really high-quality prospect in the offing, and specifically regarding the absence of strokes on the front foot that I was talking about. It was sort of like Sachin Tendulkar in that on this ground 18 years ago, 2003, 2004, when he had an issue of like trying to nick outside off-stump cover driving stuff. And Crawley was in a similar boat because he actually showed a lot of respectable restraint, right? He refrained from cover driving the ball when it was pitched up outside of off-stump largely throughout the innings. And he loves playing that shot. So it showed temperamentally that this guy has the patience, if required, to play a long innings or an important innings for his side. But then, and in doing it in the midst of a match where you made that mistake, right? Because he tried to cover drive and he was bowled through the gate, right? It's really worth praise. But probably what was even more remarkable was the way that he handled Stark and Cummins, right? You mentioned the KP thing, right? Of how his shots had an air of like dismissal.
This arrogance that is again very typically English, where it's just like, this guy's not isn't anything.
Yeah,
This guy, he's putting the ball here. I'll put it over on the deep mid wicket or down to cow corner. I don't care. Who does this guy think he is?
Yeah, but you mentioned
it's like Gower and Peterson, where they're just like, oh, what is this guy doing? I'm just gonna put that ball there and put this ball there. And
yeah, I mean, you bring up the Gower and Peterson comparisons, but what it really reminded me was Michael Vaughan when he came here in 2002, 2003, because what he did was he ended up pulling deliveries that were like really foolish, right? Like McGrath would bowl a natural, and Gillespie were the bowlers then, bowl deliveries that were, just short of a length or even good length, right? And he hadn't found a way to pull them off those deliveries, so it forced them to compensate either by over pitching or bowling a little shorter to adjust their length, and that really troubled them. And that's what Crawley did today, right? Yeah. I've always made the comparison from Crawley to Michael Vaughan because they play stylistically they're very similar.
Hopefully not the same kind of person off the field though.
Yeah, but regarding on the field stuff, right? You saw that today with Crawley, right? Because there were deliveries that were bouncing at waist high or even below, right? Where Cummins and Stark were just trying to pitch natural deliveries or bowling slightly short of a length, and he absolutely hammered them to the fence, right? With just a swivel pull, just so effortless, right? And so that forced them, like it did for Gillespie and McGrath, to adjust his length, and that they were comfortable bowling with, and then it created more scoring opportunities for him. And honestly, it's a fabulous tactic that more taller batsmen in the English setup, apart from Crawley, really should be exploring. And yeah, he did in the end get a Jaffa for Yorker to dismiss him from green.
Wasn't and just play completely around it too. So it's
but point being, right? He's shown enough to invest in him as a long-term opener.
Yeah.
After he was dismissed, though, right? England were in a little bit of a spot of a bother. They lost a couple of cheap wickets, but then Johnny and Stokes once again came to the fore. Johnny scoring 40 odd, and then Stokes as well scoring about 60 odd, and really going into that final session, right? Of final day, right? They had only lost 4 wickets, England, and so Australia needed 6 wickets in that final session. England would have looked a little bit more confident about having fixed up a draw, right? Having saved this match. But the fact that they weren't so confident about saving the match 15 overs later really came down to Cummins, right? Because, my God, he bowled a really stupendous spell, right?
Yeah.
And it was a very clever spell of bowling, because he noticed that there was some rough. The pitch was dry, it was hot. The ball started scuffing a little bit, and he was able to utilize that rough on the Kookaburra ball on one side to reverse the ball and get some massive in swing right to the right handers, with the odd one tailing in at the last moment, and that's how you got that absolute rip snorter for delivery to Markwood, that Yorker, which was bowled at the variation, and after an indifferent performance was showing in the first innings, really, he made up for it.
Yeah, sort of the last sort of bookend to this match. Jack Leach bats for
was it like 70
minutes?
Yeah,
with Stuart, along with Stuart Broad batting for 45 minutes to save the match. Obviously he gets out, but he gets him to within sight, where it's just like, okay, all Jimmy Anderson needs to do is survive 1 over. If he survives 1 over, England have drawn the match.
Yeah, I will say that it was a very exciting finish in the end, partially because of Leach's resilience to the bat and Broad's as well, but also sort of ended in an anticlimactic way, right? Because Anderson and Broad had the last 2 overs that they needed to block out with men crowding around them in the bat, so they needed to survive that.
That classic Test cricket, the thing that only happens ever in Test cricket, where they have like 8 men around the wicket.
Yeah.
One poor guy whose job it is to just chase the ball deep.
Yeah, it was very exciting to watch, don't get me wrong. But I think this is where Cummins declared it maybe a little bit too late, in the sense that he didn't, do it after Khawaja scored a century, but only after Carey went out, because along with the rain, right, when the match approached that sort of dying moment, right, the light got a bit worse, the over rate needed to be fulfilled. Um, it sort of forced his hand a bit because the umpires basically came up and said, look, you need to get the overs in before the light goes. You're going to need to bowl if you want your spinners at the end, right? And so we had a funny situation where we saw two of Australia's best batsmen, Labuschagne and Smith, the leggies, the part-time leggies, bowl two of England's most prestigious bowlers in this lineup, Anderson and Broad, who are batting, right? And so they held out to it, right?
Steve Smith got a wicket, but yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was a little bit disappointing that Cummins couldn't really deploy his best resources to enforce the win. But hey, I mean, that's what happens in cricket sometimes. But
yeah, and I think that's the great glory of Test cricket.
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes down to a part-timer having to roll his arm over for a few overs because the light is bad, and you need to try and win this match by taking one wicket, and you need just some sort of luck.
Yeah, and sometimes you can outplay a side for 5 days of a Test match and still
not win.
Right, but I thought it was a great match overall, and it actually sets the stage. Even though the series is gone, right, it's a rubber.
Yeah.
It actually sets the stage up really nicely for the next Test in Hobart, right? Because both of these teams are going to have to make some decisions regarding that. I'd say, from my perspective, just looking ahead, right? There's nothing really to lose at this point for England. They've already lost the series 3-0. They've had to bowl a lot of overs in this match, and that fast bowlers in general have had to bowl a lot of overs. I know they've rotated them, but still there's some who have had to bowl a lot, like Anderson, who's bowled 3 on the trot, Tests, and so forth. It might be a good idea to just bring in, your Robinson. It might be a good idea to bring in your best bowler that I've seen in the series, Robinson. But apart from it, maybe Overton gets a go because he offers something different. That height, 6'8", sort of bounce, a little bit different. And then for Australia, I think the key takeaway is,
find some way to get Usman Khawaja into the 11th diamond. One other sort of change in the squad, I think that Scott Boland might come out if Josh Hazlewood is fit.
That's true.
And on one hand, that sucks because Scott Boland has deserved his opportunity.
Yeah, the guy literally averages 8 in Test match cricket. I think
he's also not Josh Hazlewood.
Yeah, that's true. Like he isn't the 25, 24 averaging bowler that Josh Hazlewood is. He's more of like in the long term a 28, 29 averaging bowler. Right? Yeah. So it is fair to say that he might get.
Then again, he could also just be. You could be Akshar Patel and just average under 10 because he's a weird amalgamation of. I don't know how this works, and I don't know how you do this, but you work.
Yeah, and also the other factor is that his record at Hobart is not been that great in FC. Now, obviously, FC and international cricket are two different things, but still, it gives credence to the idea that maybe if Hazlewood is fit, he comes back.
Yeah, if Hazlewood or Richardson are fit, give them the chance to bowl in those conditions.
But yeah, I mean, it sets up, regardless of what happens, right? It will set up a really nice conclusion of the series, especially because this is going to be Hobart's first time to host an Ashes Test, right? They are a relatively new ground. It's a really proud moment for them.
Shame Tim Payne's not to play in it, but
yeah, but there are Tassies in the crowd, like your David Boones, icons of Tasmanian cricket who really, Ricky Ponting, right, would be really glad to see this. And it is a day-nighter, so you do have some interesting stuff that will happen during that twilight session.
You don't know how this match is going to turn out, is I think we're going for here.
Yeah.
Because
pretty much.
Everything about this match is going to be different because obviously it's a day-nighter, as you said, but also it's Hobart, so there's one of two wickets that's going to happen.
Yeah, it's either going to be a slow
neither
seamer,
of which may work in England's favor.
Yeah, it's either going to be a slow seamer or it's going to be a dry, flat, and low pitch, because that's usually what Hobart produces. Either one of those two. So either ways, it's just going to be a really fascinating surface that's going to be probably prepared up there. And we'll stay tuned and watch it. So you stay tuned and watch us give our comments about it. And yeah, guys, we'll take your leave. It's been great chatting, Rowan, getting.
Same to see you as well, and yeah, it's been fun.
It is, man. And I hope to have as much fun when we cover the foot test. So, on that note, guys, sign off. Take care.
See ya.